Yep, sorry. I was about to read that as Batman the Woman.
This time we watch Season 5, Episode 15, The Wild, Wild World of Batwoman.
Oh, God, where was the Adam West?
But first, devoted listener Sean asks, are there any misted movies that you particularly enjoy without the riffs? Chris?
I don't know that I've ever intentionally watched a misted movie without the riffs, although I did watch Marooned, which we'll get to someday, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. I did happen to see that on TV. My stepfather was watching it about 2 weeks before the episode with that movie aired for the first time. And I was doing my own little amateur riffing of it. And that was fun. Although it annoyed my stepfather, and eventually I had to stop and leave.
Yes.
But then I was like, oh, I know this movie when it came on a few weeks later. So that was good. But Adam, you are a connoisseur of these things. I mean, you've already mentioned a bunch of episodes that we've already looked at that you enjoy watching on Misted. I'm sure there are even more that we haven't done that you like.
Yeah, there's a few. I've already mentioned Star Crash, which I was like intimately familiar with before the episode. But there's like a handful of movies that fall under that category. I'm a big fan in terms of a so bad it's good movie of Godzilla vs. Megalon, which is going to be one of 15 Godzilla movies released by Criterion soon. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster will also be released by Criterion, but that's a no fun movie, says me.
Oh.
That one's not as good. I did watch Sadko, the Sinbad movie. And that was loads of fun because I saw a restored print. So it was all colorful, but still really, really stagey. That was a very fun experience. And Monster A Go-Go and Red Zone Cuba, I decided to watch Unmisted.
How did that treat you?
They're both, now this should come as no surprise to you, they're both terrible. But They are terrible in a way that I find really appealing, which is I love movies where time seems to stop and you are just in this weird time and space suck of nothing. And there's nothing remotely entertaining going on. The movie doesn't even have a plot in either case. They just have padding and they forgot to have a plot around it. And I kind of admire the sheer folly of it. Where there's no sense of like everything that we take for granted, such as having characters that are not likable but engaging, that's what's key, or having an interesting story, or having a story at all. Like all of these things that we take for granted day to day are completely absent. And I find that pretty adorable to see it done so badly. And of course, Robot Monster, one of the greatest bad movies of all time. Robot Monster is super fun on Rift.
Well, we might have more about plotless movies later in the episode. But also, I think I mentioned this back when we did Girls Town, but there are definitely a few episodes where I've really enjoyed the movie and then tried to watch it unmisted. And it just wasn't nearly as good because there was no pacing, because Mike or Joel and the bots often provide extra pacing with what they're doing that makes you not realize how leaden the original is. And that was the case for that. I have not gone to watch Unmisted Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, which I think would be kind of delightful, but I just as soon just keep watching it with Mike and the bots if I'm going to see that.
Yeah. It's funny. Overdrawn at the Memory Bank was a small enough success that I remember reading reviews of it before it was ever a Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode of just, weird Raul Julia public service television movie, sci-fi spectacular. And so it most of the reviews I think described it as having a Doctor Who charm. So you would not be alone if you did that. It's funny too. I could never get through it. Even though I love the episode, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians is an episode I hold pretty near and dear to my heart. It's a great episode. But Space, the Imagination Station, our sci-fi channel here in Canada, when it debuted, had a habit of showing every Christmas Santa Claus Conquers the Martians because they could not afford to license anything else.
Right.
And I could never get through the first half hour.
No.
Like, I tried.
I also seen that one on cable and just no. No, thank you. We got another letter. We got another comment, rather, from Amy on YouTube, because we post our podcasts on YouTube because some people like to listen to podcasts that way.
I'd like to think it's just Amy who's listening.
Amy is a very dedicated commenter, and I super appreciate that she comments on every video, and that's great.
Absolutely.
But this time, Amy said on our episode about the crawling hand that she liked the episode probably more than the crawling eye, which... okay.
That's crazy. That's crazy talk, Amy.
That seems crazy to me, but okay. That's fine. And mostly, she says, because the Deus Ex Machina is junkyard cats, which, okay, that's a good reason. The cats are nice. And in fact, she says she's always wanted to compile a list of every cat appearance in the series, but it has yet to happen. I should probably just look around, she says, because some other fans probably already done so. So this is going to be a call to our fans. If you have compiled, or if you know of somebody who has compiled a list of MST3K episodes with cats in them, Amy would like to know, and to be honest, I would like to know too, because now I'm super curious.
And more importantly, friends and listeners, if there is one of the SNL sketches of Toonces, the cat who could drive a car, where Toonces drives a car into a plane, please let us know. I will make one thing a little bit easy. So we've got the crawling hand. That is cat appearance number 1, I assume, unless there's a KTMA episode or a season 1 episode that predates it. But I know for a fact, doesn't the atomic brain end with the old lady's brain ending up in a black cat at the end?
Oh, I think that's right. There's also Ring of Terror from season 2, which starts with the graveyard keeper walking around saying, Puma? Puma, looking for his little black cat.
Right.
And of course, there's Puma Man.
Starring the original cat himself, Donald Pleasance.
But we must leave kittenish things behind.
Are you sure? You sure you want to do this?
If only this were the wild, wild world of Catwoman.
Mm-hmm.
Or just of cats. Let's just watch that documentary about cats in Istanbul. That was good.
Oh, yeah, Katie, I think it was called.
Katie or something. Yeah. It was really cute.
Aw.
This time we watch Season 5, Episode 15, The Wild, Wild World of Batwoman.
But first, a short, Cheating, a Centron production. Johnny Taylor's a lemon-headed boy stewing over the recent fallout from his life after he cheated on the big test thanks to his good-hearted friend, Mary. Mary helps Johnny cheat, which gets him a good grade, but one taste of the joys of cheating isn't enough for young Johnny, so he relies on Mary's kindness to keep showing him answers. Eventually, the two get caught and fail the next test. Mary's likely to recover from this scandal, but Johnny's whole life is turned upside down. He loses his social standing, his place on student council, and worst of all, is made the subject of one of the bleakest shorts ever riffed on this show.
On to our feature presentation. The Wild, Wild World of Batwoman is bad. Richard Basehart is good. Okay, so there's Batwoman. She's got a great outfit, wild hair, feathers everywhere, a glittery mask, tights, and a sort of leotard thing that shows off a shoulder and some cleavage, including a sort of bat tattoo arising from her intermammary sulcus, black gloves, a fake diamond ring outside of her glove, a massive jeweled brooch on a pocket chain for some reason, and a superhero/wrestler belt. She's got a posse of Batgirls who wear revealing and flattering outfits, and I guess they fight crimes. Sometimes they just watch crimes happen and do nothing until a man has been shot dead, and then they decide something must be done. They also seem to get kidnapped a lot, even though they have almost magical devices that can free them from chains. What I'm saying is maybe they're not very good crime fighters. But that's okay, because they're up against some real low-quality villains. Ratfink is the big boss, wearing a sort of ski mask with cutouts for eyes, nose, and a mouth, and he's in charge of a few goons and a mad scientist, Neon, who has a feral Igor-type assistant named Heathcliff, played by a cut-rate Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall. Anyway, these villains also have some basically magical devices, including an endless supply of pills that will make people so happy they start dancing. So when they hear that the Ajax Corporation has developed a device that allows you to listen in to any conversation happening anywhere, why, they must have it. The plot is full of ridiculous and confusing twists and turns, so many that they find a way to wedge in a few scenes directly lifted from The Mole People, which we covered way back in episode 24. But in the end, Ratfink's identity is exposed, the magical listening device explodes, Heathcliff briefly recovers from his idiocy, and one of the goons becomes a Batgirl.
Meanwhile, on the satellite of love, the wild, wild world of Batwoman is bad. Richard Basehart is good. Oh, wait, I've just been caught plagiarizing Chris's opening line from his movie summary, which was itself cribbed from Gypsy's essay in this episode. Forgive me, it was intended as homage, which is French for steal. And admittedly, I stole that joke from an episode of Daria. Anywho, Crow fails to understand blackjack during the prelude, much to Mike's amusement. Any gambling is interrupted when Frank shows off Team Evil's entry in this week's invention exchange, the atomic hairdryer. His first client is Dr. Forrester, to whom Frank bestows a new do that looks like a mushroom cloud. Meanwhile, Mike offers up the Razorback, an invention designed specifically to remove unsightly back hair. In the next two segments, Mike and the bots decide to write essays on cheating in order to make sense of this week's short. Reading their essays aloud, Crow is unsurprisingly the cheater, having stolen Gypsy's essay verbatim. In the penultimate sketch, Gypsy, Tom, and Mike hold a meeting to decide Crow's retribution, but ultimately hold off on anything serious because Crow seems like a good guy. Back to Deep 13 for the final segment, Frank runs away from Dr. Forrester, horrified by what he's done to his boss's hair. Surprisingly, Dr. F ends up rather liking it. So it was not enough, Chris. It was not enough that we watched The Crawling Hand, kind of tempting fate with this kind of unofficial, hey, what's the worst episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000 that we remember? We also had to do Batwoman, which is another one that Beth and I refused to pick up.
So, the wild, wild world of Batwoman is bad, whether Richard Basehart is good or not. Mm-hmm. Is this episode bad? Because, of course, that's a very different question. You know, you can have episodes with terrible, tedious movies that you don't even want to think about, but which nevertheless turn out to be pretty fun episodes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of this episode?
This episode is textbook mixed bag. I think that the sheer disappointment of the just the come down from cheating, which is an all-time great short, one of the best. They put that on the very first Rhino Shorts compilation, and wisely so. It's a great, it's perfect. And then we get to Batwoman, which is seemingly unriffable and joyless.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a good short.
Yes, and there's a few times where there were like at least a couple of riffs that were like connecting with the oddity of the movie, like when a character, a woman at the very beginning, a woman is dragged out from a bar, and I think it's Crow, like because something got lost in an edit. It's just like, well, something definitely happened there. Yep. Like that's genuinely quite funny, but for the most part, and I am totally not opposed, and I understand that you are not either, for MST3K riffing comedies, because both Alien from LA and Catalina Caper are comedies, but they're both like greatest of all time episodes of the show.
Yes.
I think there's something particularly tedious and trying about the comedy stylings of the wild, wild world of Batwoman, which is saying something, because that means that it makes the jokes in Catalina Caper seem like much sharper and wittier.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment, I think. But I will say it also seems particularly notable that all of the sketches focus on the short.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I did not notice the first time I watched this, because I think I was in such a state, almost like a tunnel vision, a trance from watching Batwoman and just hoping that the episode would get good, that I was relieved that they chose to focus on the greatness of cheating. But watching it this time, it's like, oh, they knew, didn't they? They knew that they didn't have a good one this week.
Yeah, I had a similar experience rewatching it this time, where after the first intermission sketch happens, when they've set up the fact that they're going to be talking about cheating, I was like, wait a minute, there's a lot more to that sketch. There's a whole Crow gives his thing and it's ripping off Gypsy's speech and blah, blah, blah. And it's really funny. And like, why didn't that happen? Am I crazy for it? And it's like, oh no, that's going to happen over the course of every intermission. It's Mike's third episode. Mm-hmm. And they do a little bit of playing around with that space where early on in the movie, he pops out to get some popcorn and doesn't eat it out of Tom's head this time like Joel did recently. And then, so it's nice. It's nice that they're still sort of feeling out what could be different about the Mike era from the Joel era. There's also a segment that I really enjoyed where it's just one of those subtle things, but it is where they're talking about aspects of the movie, but they're doing it indirectly, where somebody, I can't even remember why or who or what, but somebody is walking to a house, and it's this incredibly long shot of getting the character to walk all the way up the road to the front door of the house, to open the door to the house, to enter in, to look around before they finally get to the person that they're trying to talk to. It's a 30-second long thing that should have taken 2 frames.
Mm-hmm.
And they highlight how ridiculous this is by having Tom do a sort of narration as if it was a noir film.
I looked at the place. I walked towards some sort of structure in which people possibly dwelled. I noticed the agriculture. Sound editor added a tasty sax lick.
And I thought this is a really clever way of pointing out just how inept this movie is, how tedious it is, what choices it's making, without just saying, oh, this is a really long shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the kind of joking about what's going on in the directorial and editing choices in a movie that I appreciate from MST3K.
Yeah, because I think that most people can fill in the blanks when we see a character making breakfast in one scene and then we see them driving to work in the next scene. We don't need to see them take their suitcase and get into the car and then slowly turn on the car and then fiddle with the clutch for a bit and then drive away. You don't need to see all that. You can fill it in. Like that's not jarring for most of us.
No, and most of the time, I mean, those sort of driving sequences are sort of notorious in these movies, and they often riff at them, pointing out the driving or pointing out the flight and another bank turn and things like that. And those can be totally fun, but I found the way that they handled it in this case to be a little more subtle and a little more enjoyable for that.
No, like they're really trying here, and every now and then, and it's not the fault of the team. I think it's strictly the fault of the movie, on which more later. But it's like, Chris, this film is a despair suck.
Yes. Well, let's move on and talk about that then.
All right.
This movie, why is it so bad? It should have been better.
It has a lot of things going for it.
Exactly. It's a Batman movie. It's trying to be a campy Batman movie, but with women, which, great. Should be good. Should be able to do that.
And for 1/8 the cost of the opening credits to the Adam West Batman.
Yeah, so the Adam West Batman is the obvious thing that it's ripping off. This movie is from 1966, and the Adam West Batman had just come out and gotten big, and the kids are eating it up, right? I mean, Adam West's Batman was popular, as I recall.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they attracted those famous wall climbing cameos, because everybody wanted to be part of the hot new Batman show.
As well they should be, because I treated myself to a bit of research for this episode and watched some of the old Batmans, and they're fantastic.
Now, Chris, this raises a question of what episodes aside from the Liberace two-parter did you watch?
I watched the very first 2 episodes, and I watched, I think it was the first appearance of Catwoman.
And the first 2, sorry, that's a Riddler two-parter, is it not?
Yes, it's a Frank Gorshin Riddler 2-parter. And there's a fantastic sequence in which they've kidnapped Robin and made a sort of plaster cast of him. And Molly, who is the female helper of the Riddler, who is going to die at the end, spoilers. But she puts on the plastic mask of Robin to disguise herself as Robin. And so Burt Ward plays this woman, and he immediately shifts his body position and the way that he walks. And it's so fantastically well done. And like in the first couple episodes, they're already playing with like the queer dynamics of this duo. Oh, it's so good. It's so over the top. It's so amazing. It's so bright. It's so ludicrous. And Adam West is so perfectly cast in like being able to say these ridiculous things with just an absolute straight face. It's amazing. They nail it out of the gate.
Oh yeah. That was the amazing thing about the Adam West Batman. If there was ever like kind of like a clunky pilot, there's never been any evidence of it. It's never surfaced to my knowledge, and it just seems like it was kismet. Everything was in place, from the music to the lighting choices to the set design to the casting. Everything was perfect, and the scripting as well, because it's brilliantly written. The Adam West Batman is often very, very, very sharply written, and so it's a joy to behold from beginning to end. Because while the second season I think gets a little bit bloated because they had an insanely high episode order. I think there's like 60 episodes ordered for season 2, right after season 1 and the movie.
Right.
Because that's also where Batwoman is coming from, is that there was just a Batman movie that at this point would have either just come out or was about to come out. And like it's insane that despite this being a formula show and having like a high number of episodes and a very short time to turn those around, for the most part the Batman series is consistently high quality for all 3 of its years, and it's a fantastic movie.
Yes, but this does not achieve those heights. No, by any number of things. First off, I mean, I guess part of the problem is that the film is in black and white.
See, I would say that though that does lose some of the let's call it the Adam West gaudy impact that the show had. There's no reason why like a crazy black and white thing can't be funny. I mean, the monster comedies of both the Munsters and the Addams Family did quite well in black and white.
Yes. Well, I will say I wasn't trying to say that black and white movies can't be funny, just that the kind of saturated color looking like the weird colors that you would get at the time from color ink on cheap newsprint, etc. Like the way that you can go with those signifiers, those very 60s signifiers that the Batman TV show just nailed with its color palette.
Yeah.
You can't really do that in a dull black and white. That doesn't help that you have that if you're trying to go for the same vibe, which I think this one is. And I would also compare this to, there's a Mexican movie about a Batwoman called La Mujer Murciélago, which I decided to watch because, little research for this. And
you've seen all of it?
I watched the whole thing.
Whoa.
It's fine. Like it's not a great movie and it's not nearly as delightful as you'd hope, but it is in color, and that certainly makes up for a lot of the deficiencies that the sort of it's fine. It's just a perfectly fine movie from that era trying to do that kind of thing. There's nothing particularly great about it. There's nothing, well, she's pretty great, I will say. She definitely comes off as a really interesting, strong, rich woman. She's a very rich woman, and she wants to fight crime, but she also is a luchador. And of course, the big baddie is trying to steal bodies of strong people to make sort of zombies, and so goes after wrestlers, which allows her to infiltrate. It's an amazingly contrived plot, but she's really great. Like, she is a very strong female character, so to speak, in all senses of that, until the very, very end, when of course you have to end with a
Does she get married or something?
No, she gets scared of a mouse.
Oh.
It's a really disappointing ending in many ways. But, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's too good to be misdeed, but it probably would have been a perfectly entertaining episode if they were able to do it with subtitles, which of course they can't. But
yes. If only a dubbed version exists, because given the love that they seem to have for luchadors, at the very least El Santo, given the many El Santo rips that have been in the series, that would have been great. I've only seen a clip from Batwoman, which was like relatively easy to find, but I don't know. I did not commit to watching the full movie, but I think this strikes me as the main difference, which is, yes, the most noticeable thing is, of course, the black and white versus bright, in-your-face color. But I think that highlights not just the brilliance of the cinematography of the Adam West Batman, but just how good the camera work and cinematography is, and color work, the color processing is, for this 1968 Batwoman movie is.
yes.
For shorthand, I guess, Mexican Batwoman. Like, everything about it is better. You've got a far more delightful and eye-catching, not to mention revealing, costume for your Batwoman. And she's played by someone who seems to be happy to be there.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's a big factor.
Yeah. The lead actor, the Batwoman herself in this film, I don't even want to say that she's a bad actor, but she's a bad Batwoman.
Yeah, because it's reminiscent of when you're shooting films as a youngster, you would get like an adult to play an authority character, regardless of whether or not they could act or if they even wanted to be there. And that's what she reminds me of. She seems like a reluctant parent that's been dragged into their child's home movie, their big motion picture. And so she is just uncomfortable and really, I mean, the best way to describe her performance, I think, is reluctant. She does not want to be there. She is having about as much fun as a cat in a bathtub. This is like not great.
Yeah, the actor's name is Catherine Victor, and I feel like her acting choices were always informed by asking herself, what would Katharine Hepburn do if she were sedated right now? Although I thought that, and then I was like, I want to see Katharine Hepburn playing Batwoman. That would be great.
I mean, Victor's performance is so not a performance, so kind of empty, that I would watch any of the other cast members, including all of our terrible comic relief, which is everyone, play the parts.
That's the thing. Like, everybody else knows that they're in a campy movie and they're playing accordingly, and she just isn't. She just isn't in that world.
But I think that everyone behind the scenes, from directing downwards, just had no flair for comedy and no eye for comedy, and that's the main failing of the movie, because you could have made a fun and over the top and enjoyable low rent Batman, and it's in fact it's really charming on paper that this exists.
Yeah.
And I wish it was more fun. I wish it was a joy to watch, because I've got a fondness for hucksters, but no, it is just joyless. It is just joyless.
So at some point in the movie, Mike says,
like a Warhol movie, except it's kind of weird.
And when I first heard him say that, I thought it is like a Warhol movie. It was during a scene where they're all just sort of sitting around in the living room of Batwoman with a bunch of girls and a few other people there. And it's just like, they're just talking and it's just going on and going nowhere. And they're all kind of trying out bits and none of them land. And it's just sort of miserable in that sense. And I thought, yeah, this is kind of like that. And then I decided to go back and actually watch some of the Warhol. I was trying to figure out which Warhol it was most like. Mm-hmm. And I went back and watched some of the films, because I assume most of our listeners know that in addition to making paintings and such, Andy Warhol made films, or got a guy named Paul Morrissey to make films for him and under his name. And there's a lot of contention about who filmed what exactly. But, nevertheless, they all came out of the Warhol factory. Have you watched a lot of Warhol films?
I've seen a few of the shorts, and I've watched Dracula. So I've seen, there was a movie that I believe is just called Sleep, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've seen a handful of those. I've seen a handful of the shorts, and I've seen the terrible Paul Morrissey Dracula.
Right. So, yeah, Sleep, which was one of his early sort of conceptual films where he just filmed the poet John Giorno sleeping in the nude for about 5 or 6 hours, a normal sleep length, which I haven't seen, although I've met John Giorno. Which is
and did you watch him sleep?
I didn't, although I thought about it. But he just passed away recently, just a few months ago, as this episode would be released. So
I guess filming him sleep for 6 hours would be real easy now.
Yeah. Anyway, he was a really interesting poet guy, but that's a little beside the point right now. Warhol also made films like Empire, which is just a shot of the Empire State Building for all night, throughout an entire night.
Okay.
And so they're these sort of meditative things, and he was really proud of having fumbling camera work and not really doing anything with it. And then he brought on Paul Morrissey, and Morrissey actually sort of knew how to make films, although he had some very unorthodox ideas about what that might mean. And then they made a bunch of their sort of mid-period films, but then you get to films like Heat or Trash, or Dracula, which are sort of 70s era films in which, sort of like what you were saying earlier, nothing really happens. They just sort of create scenes and then they improv a bit during them. And you've got these sort of unpleasant, or maybe you might enjoy them, I don't know, people sitting around acting things out, but not really doing anything.
No, it's funny because when you find out that, pop art sensation Andy Warhol has made movies, and one of which is a big, colorful Dracula movie. And said colorful Dracula movie is coming from Warhol, who was an avowed fan of the Adam West Batman.
Yeah.
So everything feeds your mind so that you have a large first impression of what that's going to be like. And surprisingly, I mean, one, I was initially disappointed in that Warhol was not really involved, at least not in terms of credits and whatnot, with the camera work or direction in any credited way. But also, if he had or not, in terms of Dracula, if he had or not, it doesn't matter because you're right, nothing is happening. And it's not that much of a sensation. Like other filmmakers who are not necessarily known for pop art have done that better. George A. Romero, who is not the most visually striking filmmaker, when every review of your best movie says so documentary like,
Right.
You're not exactly the visuals guy.
Yeah.
But for the film Creepshow, which was essentially Stephen King and I can't get the rights to Tales from the Crypt, but we want to make a Tales from the Crypt movie. Let's make an anthology and let's create individual scenes and frames that look like panels from the comic book. So we get the lighting, we'll create strange border effects, and we'll recreate what the comic looks like, what those comics looked like back in the 50s. And that's kind of what I was expecting Warhol's Dracula to be like. Is like, oh, let's really try and create what a comic book looks like, but from the time, but on film. And I also would have appreciated, Chris, had Morrissey and Warhol tried anything, but they did not.
Right. But I want to get to the main point of this because, as you may know, Andy Warhol also made a Batman film.
Yes. Yeah, I was unsurprised, but I had never seen or heard of this before. And I was a little disappointed in that I was kind of hoping to find this whole thing on YouTube because, I mean, Andy Warhol movies are essentially unsellable junk. So,
Well, they do have, the art market is such that unsellable junk goes for quite a lot sometimes.
absolutely. But these are the ideal things to just put on YouTube and have it there. In fact, I think that if you put and monetized it, if you put Empire up on YouTube, a lot of people would be using that as a means of falling asleep in much the same way that people have those 10 hours of ambient noise from the Star Trek The Next Generation Enterprise D humming,
We have a sort of policy here. It's just a show not to link to things that are on YouTube that probably shouldn't be there, but you can find Empire on YouTube. Now, the Batman film that Warhol made was called Batman Dracula. And I will say Warhol made this one. It's before Morrissey was involved. And you can tell because it's completely unwatchable and out of focus. Now, Batman Dracula, for legal reasons, has not been released because Warhol did not ask for permission to use the Batman character. And, it's just, you can't. Bits of it have surfaced and it sometimes has been shown in like gallery spaces. And somebody has put on YouTube, which we will not link to, but you can find it, a sort of reconstruction of what they could put up of it based, like, I guess they filmed it with their camera or something. I'm not even sure.
I saw what you're talking about. There's a lot of dissolves and like new credits were made.
Yeah. And it's just really poor quality. It doesn't look like what I think the original film would have looked like. It seems to have scan lines on it or something. But it is not worth watching. It is worth saying that this film came out in 1964, so a few years before the Adam West Batman and Our Wild, Wild World of Batwoman. And it is treating Batman as a kind of camp icon before anyone else had. It's credited with being the first camp Batman. Obviously, I don't think it influenced the makers of Adam West's Batman
No.
or anyone, but it did exist. It is a weird little footnote, and it's utterly unmissable. Do you know anything about the director of this monstrosity, Jerry Warren?
I wish I didn't.
'Cause I don't know anything else about him.
Well, I was delighted. So, off mentioned on this show, there have been references to the film Frankenhooker
Oh, yes.
in the rips, and Frankenhooker was directed by cult cinema god and film collector Frank Henenlotter, and his quote on the subject is my favorite thing about Jerry Warren, which is, and this is strictly from Frank Henenlotter, a Jerry Warren retrospective is currently playing in hell.
Yes. So what else did he do?
Well, he's made a handful of movies, largely by roping John Carradine in for a day.
Oh.
Yeah. So remember the kinds of films that we've seen, like The Atomic Brain and The Unearthly?
Uh-huh.
Imagine those, but with all the style of the Batwoman movie.
Oh, joy.
The thing with Jerry Warren is that he had initially gotten his start. He had a distribution company. And the distribution company that he had, it had the amazingly generic name of Associated Distributors Productions Incorporated.
Yep. That does what it says on the tin, as they say.
Yep. But he had started off distributing films that were cheap to acquire. So he had gotten a lot of Mexican films, and so that's why we see some footage that is clearly not shot for this picture that isn't the mole people as well. Like he would get foreign films that he could get cheaply, and he would either pad out his own movies in the case of something like Batwoman, or he would create an American version of that film. But because Warren is so lazy, was such a lazy filmmaker, is that he would just buy the rights to foreign films, and instead of dubbing them, he would use narration and newly shot scenes of brand new actors, sometimes Catherine Victor, right, to just explain the largely silent movie that he's now created.
Huh. I mean, that actually sounds potentially interesting, although I'm sure he did a terrible job at it.
Rest assured he did.
So that explains a scene early on in the film when, just after the opening credits finish, there's a sequence in which a guy is held up in an alley, and the Batgirls look on and do nothing to intervene, and then panic afterwards. Because I noticed while I was rewatching it that in the background of that scene there is a neon sign in the alley, and I was like, "What does that sign say?" And I looked at it really closely, and it said, "I don't know how to pronounce this, livsmedel," something like that, which I looked up, and it's Swedish for food, basically. So it's like a Swedish food store. Mm-hmm. And I thought, where in LA is there a food store, or wherever this was filmed? I don't think this was filmed in Sweden. Where is this from? And I checked the IMDb, and the IMDb thinks that it is from some Swedish film that he just cut that footage in. And I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess we know why the Batgirls don't actually bother stopping that crime, because it happened years before in another continent.
It couldn't be less connected to the film unless one of the characters was having a flashback to said crime.
Yeah, it also does nothing except pad out the length of the film.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. Like, that's the kind of fascinating thing about Jerry Warren, is that he, there's that famous kind of joke from MST3K, which is, oh, they just didn't care.
Right.
Warren genuinely did not care. I found a quote from an interview that he did with Tom Weaver. Weaver, of course, being a great chronicler of kind of forgotten filmmakers and B movies from the 60s onwards. And Warren told Weaver, "I'd shoot one day on this stuff and throw it together. At that point, I was in the business to make money. I never, ever tried in any way to compete or to make something worthwhile. I did only enough to get by, so they would buy it, so it would play, and so I'd get a few dollars. It's not very fair to the public, I guess, but that was my attitude towards this being filmmaking.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So, I mean, points for honesty, I guess. He had no ego about him. He's, in that sense, the opposite of Roger Corman. But, my God, he's also talent-wise the opposite of Roger Corman. He has no sense of anything. In fact, I am pleased to share with you that when, for the very, very, very limited market, because, Chris, I'm sure there's irredeemable trash that you would be surprised, but I would be happy to tell you have big markets that people would love to buy collector's editions of again and again and again. But for the very limited market, for Jerry Warren, there have been Jerry Warren collections for the handful of films that he made. And they are all, I can't remember if they're on a single disc or they're spread out over 2 or 3 discs.
No one was ever going to use the disc, so it didn't matter.
Yes, that's true. But I am pleased to report that, at least for the initial Jerry Warren collections on DVD, they were called the Positively No Refund Triple Features.
Oh.
Because it's just, what do you do? His last movie, predictably enough, not only featured Catherine Victor, our Batwoman. She was in it, and this was his second last movie. There's a more than a decade of a gap between Batwoman and a film called Frankenstein Island.
Okay, you caught my attention, Mr. Warren.
Sadly, it is not about. Is neither about an army of Frankenstein creatures on an island necessarily, nor is it about Frankenstein creating his own island. It's nothing like that. It's in fact quite boring.
Oh,
but I do want to share my favorite Jerry Warren thing ever, if I may. He released a Mummy movie. And he put out this Mummy movie by stitching together 2 different Mummy movies, which featured, of course, 2 different looking mummies.
Of course.
So, since those 2 mummies are never going to interact, you have to figure out a way around that. And Warren's solution was brilliant. You see one mummy in the early part of the movie, and then in a new bit of Warren-created footage, a spinning newspaper comes towards the camera and informs viewers that the mummy had been run over and killed. So now we're going to focus on the other mummy. And that is funnier than any single moment of Batwoman. So it all, like, Jerry Warren, all's forgiven just for that spinning newspaper.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 Bat facts about today's Batisode, the wild, wild world of Batwoman. Go, Adam, go!
Much has been made about this movie's shameless borrowing of mole people footage. Yet, it's somewhat fitting that a movie starring a Batwoman cribbed footage from a movie starring Alan Napier. Napier appeared as the High Priest in The Mole People, but became a beloved household figure as Alfred the Butler on the Adam West Batman.
Even though Batman the movie is every bit as good as the wild, wild world of Batwoman is terrible, they both have something terrible in common: racist jokes using fake Chinese. Though no match for the interminable seance scene in Batwoman, Batman the movie ends with world leaders getting their brains swapped and speaking each other's languages. The white actor who gets brain swapped with a UN rep from China did ropey Chinese language shtick, providing an unsightly blemish on an otherwise perfect movie.
After this film, Steve Brody moved from bats to spiders. Brody, who appears here as Detective Flanagan, would also appear in The Giant Spider Invasion, Rift in Season 8.
Bruno Visoda, who plays the exciting character of Seltzer from the Patent Office, and yes, his name was Seltzer, is a bit of an MST3K that guy. Visoda also appeared in such misted films as Daddy-O from Season 3, Attack of the Giant Leeches from Season 4, Gunslinger from Season 5, and The Undead from Season 8.
If you're wondering why Batwoman's army of Batgirls mostly sit around and look pretty, it's because they're not actresses. They were all dancers at a local strip club that had been subject to a police raid and shut down. Sensing an opportunity to sex up this saggy picture, the casting director recruited them all to be the titular character's blood-guzzling assistants.
Though Catherine Victor offers a joyless wooden performance as Batwoman, she had more say in the character than you'd think. Victor designed her own costume, since Jerry Warren, ever the genius, refused to hire a costume designer.
Furthermore, Batwoman's bat insignia was all Victor. The actress used a cardboard cutout of a bat she made and traced it along her chest. With the outline done, Victor colored in her bat with eyeliner.
Though primarily associated with Jerry Warren Productions, Victor also worked with robot monster director Phil Tucker in the Cape Canaveral Monsters, and Mole People's Virgil Vogel in Invasion of the Animal People. It's unclear whether she provided her own costumes for those films.
Today's short was narrated by Arden Booth, who would contribute another mix of concern and boredom to his narration of another Centron short, What About Juvenile Delinquency, riffed later this season.
Did the blood-drinking prelude in today's movie strike you as a little out of place? Well, when slapped with a potential lawsuit over copyright infringement, Warren tacked on the scene and re-released The Wild, Wild World of Batwoman as she was a hippie vampire.
As the cups of blood are passed around, Mike suggests,
It's Alba 66.
Alba 66 was the enticing name of a hot chocolate mix and the decadent younger sister of Alba 77, which was more of a protein powder for dieters. Popular in the 70s and 80s, the Alba family seems to have been finally discontinued only a few years ago.
For said blood-drinking scene, Crow quips,
It's like a potty in my mouth and everyone's invited.
This line is best remembered by Simpsons fans coming from Ken Griffey Jr. when he develops a taste for Nerve Tonic in Homer at the Bat, but the line was first heard on the show when Moe the bartender tries Homer's homemade drink in Flaming Moe's.
And why bring up The Simpsons at all? Simple. Flaming Moe's is an episode close to J. Elvis Weinstein's heart. That's our Josh Weinstein, who was the original Servo, not the Josh Weinstein who wrote for The Simpsons. In fact, Weinstein discussed the episode at length on a Simpsons podcast, and we'll have a link to it in our show notes.
Is this the end for our fact-slinging duo? Let's talk about the cheating short, because I'm tired of the Batwoman nonsense.
We need to move away from this as quickly as possible, yes.
Tell me something interesting about this short.
Well, one of the things that I love, absolutely love about cheating is that I had kind of forgotten about this, but there's a lot of really interesting work with camera placement and some special effects and lighting.
Sure.
Like, this is an interesting looking movie. And it's weird. This short about why it's not good to cheat at school, Chris, is more dynamic visually than a movie about a crime-fighting Batwoman and her army of strippers.
Yes. You say there's a lot of interesting use of lighting. I think it's a little more true to say that there's interesting use of absolute darkness.
Yeah, fair enough. This is the most noir subject about cheating ever done.
Oh, it's so dark. It's like literally, it's both sort of emotionally dark, but it is incredibly not lit. Mm-hmm. You just have this young teenage boy sort of vaguely visible in a field of black film stock.
Yeah, that's kind of what I always kind of appreciated, is that you seem to be in this kind of limbo throughout, which seemed, rather than some kind of accidental thing, was in fact a conscious choice by a smart filmmaker.
Well, perhaps. It also allowed for some of the special effects to happen, such as the floating heads of his teachers to appear in front of his bed.
Which I adore.
Oh, yeah.
Disapproving head. Oh, man. But I mean, this makes sense because this is our first Centron short. And Centron shorts were often directed and occasionally feature some acting work by none other than Herc Harvey, a man whose name is very fun to say.
That's not a real name.
You've never met that many Herc? I mean, clearly it's short for Hercules Harvey.
I assume so. Was it, in fact, short for Hercules Harvey?
I have no idea. If it turns out to be Hercton, I will be...
No, it wasn't. I just checked. It's Harold.
What?
Harold Arnold Harvey, known as Herc.
But if you're a Harold, or if you're a Harrison, or if you're a Henry, you have the perfect perfect name of Harry to go to.
Well, you also get Hank, and I think Herc is derived from Hank.
Oh man, Herc is way better than Hank.
Anyway, so not Hercules Harvey.
Well, I do think that what we see in terms of his directing style and his visual sense is that he is quite a Herculean filmmaker. He puts forth a lot of effort and possesses a great deal of strength, because this is visually fascinating to watch. I think, and so is, I guess, the movie that he is best known for that you have just recently watched.
Yeah, I watched this because you told me to.
That's why anybody watches movies.
I suppose so. I had not realized that Herc Harvey was the director of this film because I'd never even heard the name Herc Harvey because I guess they never made fun of his name on the show, and I never particularly noticed it if it was even in the credits for these movies. But yeah, you made me watch Carnival of Souls, which I thought had been made by an Italian director.
No, though I can understand why you would think that.
Sometimes you hear about a movie in a weird context, which is how I'd heard of Carnival of Souls, and it's a long and boring story. But I just assumed it was like a Fellini film or something, or some equivalent director that I just didn't know much about. And no, it's an American film by a guy named Herc.
And yet it could not be more European. That's probably why it took as long for it to catch on as it did. In interviews, Harvey stated just how much he was influenced by both Bergman and Cocteau. And that's how I wanted to look. And one of the things I imagine, even now, even watching it for the first time in 2019, the camera choices are unusual.
Oh, yeah.
And the opening credits are extremely, from minute one, you have the opening credits, and they're strange. Like the way that the title floats along the water, and we get a shot of a little bit of land that our character will end up washed up on shortly after the credits. And it's almost indecipherable for a few seconds. It's like, what am I actually looking at? And there's a lot of strange, some would say art house choices like that, where a film like Carnival of Souls, like many of the best horror films, is really more about presentation than story.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that there were a lot of striking directorial camera choices and editing choices in particular. There were some really impressive edits. There's one particularly interesting edit early in the movie that I think contrasts really nicely with the bit in Batwoman that I talked about Tom making fun of earlier, the long walking sequence. She drives up into a gas station to get her tank refilled and to find out how to get to the boarding house that she's going to be renting a room in early in the movie. And the gas station attendant points her off in the distance. Oh, it's that way. And the camera follows his point to the blackness of night because it's dark out. And the blackness of night turns into the door opening and the landlady showing her her room. And it's like, that's such an efficient edit. And it's so startling and it's so striking. And wow, did Batwoman not have that?
No, Batwoman did not have editing.
If you want any movie to seem better, watch it immediately after Batwoman.
Yes, honestly, I could have recommended you watch Armageddon by Michael Bay, and you would have been like, "Wow, the choice to use Aerosmith."
It was so smart. But yeah, no, this was a really well done, smart film, and I think what I particularly appreciated about it is that, in a certain sense, this film also kind of wears its budget on its sleeve. Like, you can tell this was made on the cheap.
Yeah.
But it makes so many interesting choices along the way. It's so aware of the budget that it has, and it's aware of what it can do within that budget and how it can maximize everything. And it just, the direction, the choices, even down to the script, right? Like, this is a script that was designed to be filmed on the cheap.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the reasons why I think Carnival of Souls is so effective, no matter how many times you've seen it. I rewatched it for the podcast as well, and this is my third time seeing it. And there were moments where I was still kind of like startled and kind of I got that kind of fresh reaction that you get, seeing something for the first time. Still, there are effects in the movie, sometimes just simple scares, like when our lead is driving down the road and she's got a sense of unease about her, so she keeps looking all over the place. And she looks outside the window at one point, and there's nothing there. When she goes back, we have a nice kind of like close-up of her behind the wheel, and we get that shot again of her in profile. And we see the window outside, and suddenly there's a face out of focus that is just hanging there, even though she is speeding by. And she sees it, screams, and because there is no logic to what the situation she's trapped in, she just speeds up and doesn't look. And it really recaptures what I guess you want out of fear and horror and all that, which is that childlike sense of, oh, what if there's nothing I can do about this thing that terrifies me?
Indeed, because it's like having your teacher's head floating above your bed.
I know. Perhaps she was caught cheating. She was cheating death.
Well, just time for one more thing before we wrap up on this episode. Herc Harvey, when he was working at Centron, got to work with a lot of actors and so forth. And one of the actors that he got to work with, or I guess singer might be a little more appropriate, is a guy named Dennis Day.
Any relation to Doris?
I don't think so, except that they both sang, and Doris sang better.
Oh.
Dennis sort of was very much in the 50s mode of big singing. And, it's fine. I wouldn't necessarily seek out his singing products, but he was the singer for a radio show that gets mentioned in the opening of the short. I believe Tom is the one who says,
The Jack Benny program.
And Dennis Day was, for a while there, the singer on the Jack Benny program. And for a while there, I mean, from 1939 until 1974, he was basically Jack Benny's singer person hanger-on.
Wow. I had just assumed that the hanger-on for Jack Benny, having not listened to a lot of the radio show, but having watched the 1950s Jack Benny program on television. But I would think that the hanger-on would be Mel Blanc, just because Mel Blanc is in virtually every episode.
He was on the TV show as well, Dennis Day.
Okay. Was he... I'm just trying to think. I guess what was his role? Was he there as a band leader? I'm just trying to think of who he would be.
See, here's the thing. I know the radio show much better than I know the TV show. And I totally recommend the radio show. If anybody's interested in old-time radio shows, Jack Benny is basically one of the best ones. That and George and Gracie are the two ones that you can still very much enjoy.
Yeah, take that, Fibber McGee and Molly.
Yeah, seriously, I tried that one. It's no good. Yeah, Dennis Day is playing himself in the TV show, and he's sort of always a sort of dumb, young singer. And yeah, like I said, I haven't watched much of the TV show, so I don't really know what his role there was, but he's always on this radio show. After 1939.
I was always impressed because not only did you have Jack and Rochester, who were such great comedy characters.
Oh, they're so good.
And extremely well played. Both of them are just again, perfect performances. But it is comforting somewhat in these ages to know that I believe Jack Benny, fought so that the actor playing Rochester would get a decent paycheck, which now doesn't seem like anything, but in that era.
Yeah, Eddie Anderson, the guy who played Rochester, for those who haven't watched or listened to it, but it was African-American and faced a lot of racisms as
you do.
As you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, apparently Jack Benny was pretty good for the era.
Yeah.
At dealing with that sort of thing. So yeah, check it out. If you've been affected by the issues of this show, if you've been traumatized by a case of cheating, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itsjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that we mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes, which should be in your podcast app, but you can also find them at itsjustashow.com/episode/60.
All right. Well, we're moving from seasons, Chris. We've gone from Batwoman season, and we're finally heading into the Christmas season.
Yes, it's certainly feeling very cold because it's totally December as we're recording this. We definitely didn't record this several months in advance.
Oh, definitely not.
And so our next episode is going to be a little bit of holiday cheer. And so why not take a look at that classic episode, Season 3, Episode 21, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
Ah, Pia Zadora, I adora.
Patrick Swayze Christmas Times.
This is one of those greatest of all time episodes. This is easily the best of the Christmas specials, with apologies to that one Gamera from KTMA. That's a Christmas special.
I totally love Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. I agree, it is the best Christmas special that they did. So I am looking forward to getting into the holiday mood and checking that out once again. But until then,
please use your Atomic Podcast players responsibly.
And join me for the great taste of Alba 66. Take it away, Theme Squad.
A Jerry Warren retrospective is currently playing in hell.